I would just say, and and stop here, that I think the real challenge for Israel now, and it's a hellish challenge, is that Israel's losing on three fronts right now. It's losing on the narrative front, despite the fact that it was attacked, that Hamas broke the ceasefire, that its civilians in pre-1967 Israel were killed, mothers in front of kids, parents in front of children, women were raped. Israel's lost the narrative because in retaliating against Gaza, against Hamas, which embedded itself among civilians, it's killed thousands of Gazan civilians. And you put all that on TikTok and on video and whatnot, and that's a very hard narrative to win anymore. So it's lost the narrative war. It's lost the morning after war, in large part because Prime Minister Netanyahu is refusing to hold a cabinet meeting to discuss the morning after, because it will have to have some Palestinian component, and the right-wing members of his cabinet insist that there be none. In fact, there was a huge rally in Jerusalem, in the biggest theater in Jerusalem yesterday, where you had a whole bunch of people come out for resettling Gaza with Jewish settlements. Not the best idea. And lastly, Israel's losing on the regional front. It's being surrounded by, America has two aircraft carriers in the Middle East, one in the Mediterranean, one in the Persian Gulf, aircraft carrier groups. And Iran basically has four what I call landcraft carriers. They're called Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Shia militias. So these are just like aircraft carriers on land. They're platforms to project power, and that also give Iran what I call implausible deniability, that it has nothing to do with their actions. And the only way to deal with that kind of threat is with a coalition. And so what I've been arguing in my columns is that the only way Israel can reverse the narrative, the only way it can have a partner for the morning after, the only way it can have a regional coalition is if it has a legitimate, credible, effective Palestinian partner tied to a process for some kind of two-state solution. Now, Israelis rightly and understandably say, don't even talk to me about a two-state solution and a Palestinian state. One can totally understand that. Unfortunately, it can't overcome these dilemmas without that Palestinian partner. And my hope is after, if we get a ceasefire and a hostage release here, right. That, because the hostages, again, understandably make Israelis really crazy, and that's really frozen a lot of the politics, that we can return to the discussion of a Palestinian state, but it'll have to be very different. We'll have to talk about demilitarization, really strict controls. You can't just say, hey, let's have a Palestinian state. Israelis aren't going to go for that in the least. So that discussion hasn't begun, and we're going to have to look to Palestinians also to take the initiative, because that state has to be legitimate, credible, and effective from their point of view and everyone else's. So that's where we are. Best I could say in 5 minutes. And I have zero visibility about where this is going to go. I have no idea how this story ends.